guess we are live. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining another Fugue Office Hours. I am Drew and got my colleague Ricardo. Hey, Ricardo.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Good, good. So Fugue we're all about putting engineers in command of cloud security and compliance. That's what we're here to talk about again today. What are we going to look at, Ricardo?
Yeah, so today we're going to start looking at some of the reporting aspects. If folks have seen the previous episodes, we set up our environment. We looked at some kind of initial views of compliance, reporting, security, that sort of thing. As we go along, we're just going to start getting into more and more things that you can do with Fugue. So today we're really going to start looking at some of the reporting aspects, the data that we can pull out of Fugue. We'll take a look back at the kind of sub environment that I created that we worked on, and we'll touch on some of the things that we talked to Josh about last week. So we got a lot. We'll probably get through it in a condensed amount of time, but yeah, it'll be cool. And I'll even show how you can kind of grab some instant reports from the CLI as well.
Sounds awesome. Cool.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing then.
Nice.
And hopefully my screen is seen. I will make this big. So Drew, can you confirm, are we seeing my screen?
Yeah, looks great.
Perfect. So this is, in our previous office hours, we were kind of messing around with this specific environment. So what this environment is really just a subset of a larger account. I just focused it on a specific region. As you can see here, I'll actually plug our next week's office hours. I'm going to be modifying this and tracking some changes and showing how Fugue manages that. But today we're really talking about all of the compliance reporting elements of Fugue. So we can look at this specific network, and I'll actually go to the broader environment to take a look, which is our whole account. And we look at the different compliance families. So Fugue is going to report on all of these different compliance families. We will be able to see specific control evaluations for each one of these compliance families. So this is kind of our first look. When we start looking at compliance in detail, it's really going to be specific to whatever these compliance families are. You have the ability to filter these things out, so you'll be able to see the evaluations. Fugue gives you information. So in all of these cases, you will be able to see the number of resources that are being evaluated and checked against, and whether it's evaluating to compliant or non-compliant. One of the things that is done is if there are multiple resources for a control check, so we'll look at this one because it's workforce security and HIPAA. If one of these resource types is non-compliant, then the whole control evaluates to non-compliant. One of the other views that you can use within Fugue is a compliance by resource type view. So if there are specific resources that you may be focused on from an engineering perspective or a network security, you can actually filter out these different areas within the tool itself. So if you want to take a look at just your S3 buckets, you can do that. If we scroll up, we'll see that 23 different S3 buckets, all of them non-compliant. Not so concerned about that right now, but you'll be able to see an evaluation of each one of these as an individual. So each one of these specific resource IDs associated with the S3 bucket, and then whatever those evaluations are. So the fails across the different compliance families. The other view that you can have in the UI is a compliance by resource view. So each of the individual resources has an evaluation. You can filter that out by region. If you need to filter that out by tag to focus on a specific resource type, or maybe you have set it up as departments or I don't know, roles within your organization or applications, you can filter it out that way by tag. So these are the different ways that we're going to review that. So one of the other things that we wanted to do today was to export that data. So we have all this information in the UI, and now what are we going to do with it? We want to start creating reports so that we have some actionable insight, actionable information So the first thing we can do within Fugue is we'll go to export data, which is basically all of the accounts that we have or all of the environments that we have created. We are going to get an export of those environments. So in here, you'll see tabular data with compliance controls, rules, resources, and rule results. So many of our customers come to us wanting just the data, and they want to produce their own reports, and this is exactly how you would do that. So the ability to extract all of this data, we will go through this process and do the data extraction, and then we'll take a look at it and see how we can start using that. So the data is being exported as we speak. Another way to access information, and this is a really a good way to keep other members of the team that may not interact with Fugue directly engaged and aware of what the compliance posture is on whatever frequency they need to engage. And this is just the compliance reporting email. So we can go to each one of these environments individually. And we'll send this report now. And as soon as I get that in email, we'll take a look, but I'll also do that for the overall. So this is the environment that I created. That's basically just a single region environment for this larger environment that we have for office hours, but I'm going to send myself an update for that as well. And those are on their way. And it looks like the data export has completed. So we have that downloading. And now hopefully it opens in Excel. Not that I'm not a fan of numbers. But anyway, so here, and we start expanding these so that we can see them a little more clearly. But you'll see now all of the data that from all of the scans that we checked. We even have information regarding the roll-on of those things. We have rule messages. So Drew, as you can see, I mean, there's a ton of information here, and it just comes down to, okay, we have this data. How are we going to parse all this data? And really, customers have the ability to take a sheet like this. You can even do some things with like sorting and filtering. Being able to filter it. So if I want to look at specific compliance families, I can just pull up CIS and CIS controls. So something like that, where I can filter it out, and maybe I'm only interested in some of the network related resources. So if I want to look at VPCs, for example, I can decide just to do all the VPC sort of results. But what you get out of that is you get a ton of information. You get details on the control that's failing. So obviously from an auditing perspective, as an auditor, you start going down the list of the different controls that you're looking at. You'll have all that information. If you are a network engineering or operations person, you have the ability to really hone in on those resource types that are most important to you and be able to really narrow in the sort of detail that you want to get in those environments, and really to make it so that you can start cleaning up. So in my case, where I'm looking at, that specifically that CA1 central environment, I can filter that there. And here is essentially my created task list. So this is how I can go about cleaning up my VPCs, seeing all of these different resources that are an issue, and starting to address those that way. So a lot of detail that you can glean from that, a lot of things that you can do, and really being able to manipulate some of that data. I'm going to jump into the email report because we get those reports as well.
Hey, Ricardo, really quick. We got, Dave Williams is in the audience. Hey, Dave. He That's a good question about the data export information that you get, how useful that is for like auditors and sort of like I guess a history for auditors to be able to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a couple of different ways that you can manipulate things in Fugue, and thanks, Dave, for joining. Really appreciate it. One of the other areas that we look at, these scans that Fugue performs are all captured. So that information and being able to actually go back to some historical data, and I think we did our first office hours here, so sometime a couple of weeks ago. And that data is there. So I can go back and I can actually see how things were at that particular time. So each scan that's performed gets a scan ID, and you can start extracting information from each one of those scans. So I have the ability to really go back to see how things were at that particular date. And my whole dashboard now is based on July 28th. So when we do that data export, you can start looking at a lot of that information over a period of time. And I'll actually get into some of the other reporting aspects as well and show those. So some of the other custom dashboard reports that we produce, and you can actually start getting those on a daily or weekly basis as well along with that. So tons of information, and we'll probably touch on it on a later office hours, but access to the data warehouse and being able to manipulate some of the historical data via SQL queries is another feature that we have. So we may not get deeply into that here, but definitely we'll talk about that in a future office hours.
Yeah, absolutely. Are the scans held in perpetuity?
In perpetuity, yes. So as long as your environment is set up with Fugue, you will continue to have that data. Even if you decide to pause your scans, so say if, for example, you decide, hey, this isn't an active environment that we're really concerned about, and you decide to pause those scans, as long as that environment is alive and you just have that, and even if you're not scanning it, that data will be there.
Awesome.
So in terms of the compliance reports, so this is an example of the email reports. So these are going to come to whoever needs to get them. What's really nice about it is it's just a high level, because we often have folks at an executive level that don't necessarily need to get into the kind of the nitty-gritty details, but they want to see, what's compliant, what's non-compliant, and this is going to give you a summary. So there may be some things that you look in here as non-compliant controls that come up on this list that jump out at you, and executives or management's always going to say, hey, what's up with CIS 3-9? Why don't we have this log metric filter? Why doesn't this exist for our config changes? So you can create task lists from this. People get some oversight, and then eventually you'll have a number of these reports that you'll get on a daily or weekly basis, and then you can make some decisions based on that. Whether you're going to reach out to folks to address those things. The other thing that you can do and receive, and I don't know if it's on my desktop, and if we notice my desktop from previous office hours, I've cleaned it up, Drew, so
Nice.
So we don't get any comments from that.
In mind.
So here are a couple of the CAN reports. So we'll actually go into some of these. So these are the types of reports and dashboard reports that you're going to get, and this is over a period of time. So you'll take a 30-day snapshot, and this can be customized in some levels. But what you're going to get is you're going to look at your overall scanned resources. You're going to get a number of what that number of compliant resources are, and then you have your percentage of resource compliance. So you get to look at your resource compliance over time. So obviously, this is one of those situations, and these are all dev and demo accounts, but if this is a production account and you start out at 80, you obviously want to see that going up and to the right over time. And this is something, a dashboard view that's going to give you that. You're also going to be able to see the resource compliance types. So of all of the different resource types within AWS, you then get to see which are compliant and non-compliant. So you get a total number as well as a percentage. So and that's in a nice bar graph for you as well. Here, this is another non-compliant resource over time, and obviously you want that number to go down. In this case, this is kind of going up and sticking up there for a little bit. And then you look at your ones that have critical and high rule violations, and I'll actually show some of the severity levels within the UI. But this will give you an idea of the non-compliant resources that have that critical or high rule violations, and you can address those. And then you can look at it by Fugue environment. So the environment that you have based on the environment name, you'll be able to see the number of non-compliant resources in a specific environment so that you can start targeting action there. Another view of this is a compliance posture dashboard view, where we're looking at rule violations, and this is going to give you an idea by severity. So you see that we have 749 total violations. We get higher 138. So obviously those are the ones that we want to target when we look at these rule violations by service. So we look at some of the bigger culprits within AWS. We talk a lot about IAM. Our CTO has done master classes talking about IAM, so I encourage you to check out the videos there. But you'll be able to see that that's a big culprit for everybody when it comes to rule violations is IAM. Then we look at our specific environments, and we have the rule violations there by environment. Again, violations over time. So we get to see the total rule violations, the total rule results. This is over time, and then we have our total rule results on this side. And then again, a time graphic. So you obviously want to see that going down. This is pretty steady, so it's not terrible, especially for just a dev environment for sample data. Not terrible. And then we get to see each one of the controls. So we get a percentage of the control violations. We basically look at it from month to month. So month over month, the purple being June 28th, and the blue being July 28th. So we get to look across all of the compliance families that we are evaluating in a specific environment. In this case, we're looking at all of them. And our last, let's see if I'm showing the right one. And this is a customized report based on CIS only. So in this, we're looking at all of the controls that we're evaluating for CIS benchmarks. We'll see our number of compliant controls, and again, that compliance percentage. So that's fairly low. Obviously, people will want theirs to be higher, and we'll work towards that. And then we get to look at the different areas of the control family. So number 1 being identity and access management, 2 logging, 3 monitoring, 4 is networking, and then we get to see our control compliance percentage over all of these. Again, IAM being a big culprit in a lot of environments, so that is not terribly uncommon, but obviously we want to work on that. And then monitoring, whether you have CloudTrail enabled, CloudWatch alarms and such set up, you obviously want to have that. So we see that that's a low percentage there. Then we look at each one of the environments. So each specific environment that you have created in Fugue, you'll be able to look at your non as well. Again, the important control compliance over time. And for all of those operations and engineering folks and compliance and the compliance officers out there, you obviously, this is the one that irks you because you see over time, you obviously want to see that it's improving. This one is one that's kind of going down and staying flat. Again, a dev environment, but you will obviously in your own environments be able to see that number hopefully improving, because that's ultimately the goal, is to become more and more compliant and to be obviously improving on that specific posture. And then this last one over here is just the non-compliant resources by service. So again, IAM, in this case, is EC2 instances, which is not super common, but it is obviously a culprit. And so that's interesting and really tells us, hey, let's take a look at this, especially if EC2 is failing a lot of the CIS controls. We have KMS, and we look at encryption and keys, CloudWatch logs, and CloudTrail. So a ton of information that we gleaned from that. Drew, one of the things I do want to touch on is customers always ask us, say, hey, I have VPCs that I'm not so concerned about, and how do I address those? Or how do I exclude those from my compliance checks?
So these would be maybe the defaults that you get from AWS when you create an account.
Exactly. So I'm actually going to do it in environment that we created. So that CA network environment that we've been working on, we see this again, small subset, but I'm going to look at this VPC because I think this VPC is the default VPC.
Which is often created in violation of some compliance regimes, right?
Yeah, so these, whenever you get your AWS account, you get default VPCs in each region, and you get a default security group. And there's usually an allow all egress. I'm not sure if it gives you an allow all ingress or not, but they're non-compliant by default, and they go against AWS CIS benchmarks by default. And so quite often, and one of the things the uses of Visualizer is really to see if anybody's deployed stuff in there. Because we often see with our customers one of these default VPCs with instances that are deployed in there, and it's connected to an internet gateway. And I think I might have done this on one of our earlier office hours, but I shut that portion down. So this is not going in or out, but it's still non-compliant. But it could be one of those situations where I'm not so concerned about it. So we'll look at this specific VPC, and I'm actually looking for the ID, so BBE, and then we can go into our compliance report and look at compliance by resource, and I could just highlight the VPCs, and then this is the one we're looking at, this BBE, and what I can do is now from this view I can actually look to see which one of the associated controls and what that rule evaluation is and why it's failing. So, and this actually happened last week. I think it was last week or earlier this week, which would have been yesterday. Confusing. Quarantine days run together.
It's a day, another.
But a customer was saying basically, hey, we've got this VPC that is a dev VPC, and they've got, they haven't broken out into multiple accounts. So they've got this dev VPC that's in their main account that their production is in a separate VPC. So they're just using VPC separation. And they're not so worried about a lot of the control evaluations in that VPC. So it was really, how do we exclude that? So it's just a matter of creating a waiver. So
now there might be some other security reasons why you wouldn't necessarily want to organize all of your cloud environments that way. I'm sure Dave might be cringing at that particular use case. That's maybe for another office hours on separating, or a cloud security masterclass.
Yeah, one of those. And Dave, I definitely will be tagging you to join me here. So if you're listening, you're on the hook. And this is one of those cases where I can create a waiver. So again, I'm just saying don't need it. Don't want to evaluate it. And so right now I'm telling Fugue, in my reporting, in the evaluation of this environment, that I'm waiving it. So I've created the waivers. What's really nice is you'll be able to see the waivers as you set them up. So you can see that I've set up 2 waivers based on this specific VPC. Don't evaluate, don't need it, whatever you want to call it. And this, obviously really important, who did it? I did it. So we have that information there as well. I can go back to this environment and trigger a scan. So there's one last thing that I wanted to show before we stopped this session of office hours, and I touched on this the last office hours with Josh. So the other cool thing about all this information, so we are able to extract data. We often talk about I'm doing this on a day-to-day basis, engineering, and I don't want to fool around with the UI. So one of the things that we talked about, and we'll probably do in office hours where we really get into detail about using the CLI, but also how you can incorporate use of the CLI into your automation. So if you're using pipelines and you want to start integrating these Fugue checks, this is a line that I could have in my CLI, which would give me some level of output. And what I did, this is just, I chose the compliance family with CIS, but this is going to give me detailed evaluation of a specific scan that I did, which is right here. And it's telling me all the compliance by rules. I chose CIS as my family. And essentially, it's going to give me the rundown. It's going by rule. There's 43 rule checks. I'm going to know some of these are unknown, only because I think in that Canada network, I'm just looking at some of the network resources, but I will be able to see specifically, what those rule evaluations are. What's really nice about it as well is, this is something that can be that's going to be something that you could automate. So when you run that pipeline deployment, you can automate that output. This could be saved as an artifact. It can be sent to an S3 bucket, sent to somebody's email, SNS triggers. There's a whole lot of creative things that you can do with it. But ultimately, getting this sort of actionable report information. So, and this info could even be used as a report. So it's a JSON object. If you want to use that with BI tool of choice, you can do that as well. And this is something that can be generated every time you scan, or every time, really anytime you want to scan or get information, you'll be able to generate that and get this sort of information, especially as we talk about moving compliance and security into engineers and developers' hands. So, being able to get all of this good information directly from the CLI is actually a big thing. So I know people didn't log on to see me scroll through the JSON object, but wanted to point that out why we are here. So I talked a lot, Drew. Didn't have anything else on office hours. I don't know if there were any questions that we have or anything else that I could bring to light, but this is really what we wanted to cover for this session of office hours. Really getting some details on your compliance, the data export feature, getting the reporting, all of that available for you at Fugue. So if you are a Fugue customer and you have not started getting the reports, let us know. We're happy to help you, along that path and making sure that you're getting all the information and report that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dave's feeding us some good topics for upcoming office hours. He says down here, they're feeding reports and drift information to their ticketing system, so then they can assign it to those tickets to the engineers that are responsible to go deal with those. We're definitely going to be looking at integrating Fugue with ticketing systems, what kind of drift detection looks like, so you can identify misconfiguration in your environment when it happens, and obviously get that information to the engineers that need to go in and fix those things. That doesn't get into automated remediation, which I know we also want to talk. There's a lot of subjects we want to cover in office hours.
Yeah, we're doing, I know, and I didn't put it up this time, but as we look at the Basecamp ones and really kind of picturing compliance and security as an ascension up a mountain, because you're always kind of battling to get control over it, but the goal is really to get as much information as you can, actionable information that you can start, as you mentioned, creating tickets, start remediating some of these things, and as you get a hold of things, you start ascending, you start doing more. So we'll definitely start, getting into some more Basecamp 2 and Basecamp 3 topics. So yeah, definitely looking forward to it. So appreciate those suggestions. And I see one other question. Is office hours a standing thing each week? Yes. So we're going to be doing this weekly. We definitely want people, Fugue users, even if you're new to Fugue, you haven't played around with it. We definitely want to hear what you want to see, what you want to do. So we really want to take kind of little chunks in each one of these sessions to help people to start effectively using Fugue more, and that's really the goal.
Yeah, so every Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern time, in all likelihood, we'll be doing sort of extra hours sessions as needed, or bringing customers on, or talking to different Fugue engineers about specific things they've built. So, but you can count on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. You brought up that Basecamp thing. I need to make sure I've got the diagram that we can flash on the screen. Essentially, just that in a nutshell, every customer that uses the cloud kind of goes through the same sort of journey and challenges in getting out in front of cloud security. Basecamp 1 is generally where everybody starts, which is where do we stand? What is the current security and compliance posture of our environment? Find out where you are out of compliance. And then, with Fugue, you get a clear path towards bringing your environment into compliance and obviously setting up reporting so everybody that needs compliance reports gets them. Basecamp 2 then is, well, we know that clouds are constantly changing. We're always updating our environments. So you want to make sure you're tracking that change in near real time and you're getting alerted on changes that happen so you can identify drift and misconfiguration and address that quickly before the bad guys get there. Basecamp 3 is all about shifting left, so you can kind of build security and compliance into your software development lifecycle early, so your developers can find and fix issues when it's a lot easier and cheaper and faster to do that rather than later when you might get hung up on approvals. And then there's the Summit, which is really about automated remediation, kind of getting the human out of the loop to make sure that not only are you moving fast, but you're doing so securely and efficiently, and your engineers are really focused on building value for your customers or your organization. So that was, I guess, a long-winded way. If I have a diagram, I might be able to speed that up. But we
1,000 words, so you did.
Yeah, we talked so much about Basecamp 1 and Basecamp 2, so I want to make sure people know what we're talking about there. So yeah, we've got a lot to cover. I think we could probably do office hours every week for the next decade, and we still won't run out of topics to talk about.
Yeah. So speaking of topics, so next week we're probably going to dig a little bit deeper into some of the topics that Josh brought up. So for those of you who didn't see last week's, we kind of interviewed Josh about some of the things that he likes to prepare for prior to going on vacation. So setting up alerts, what he's looking at, and it really kind of delves into a conversation about setting up baselines, capturing configuration drift, knowing what changed, those sorts of things. So next week, what we're going to do is I'm going to jump back into my AWS environment. I'm going to mess around with it a little bit and kind of continue to bring it into a good level of compliance, but tracking all those changes. So just kind of still looking at that Basecamp 1 early on, but getting a grasp of those changes, what that means, how do we see those differences, those sorts of things. So we'll be doing that next week. And again, continue to send us ideas. There's a lot to do with security and compliance in the cloud. So that's the kind of fun part, but it's definitely something that we're tackling and having fun doing it at Fugue. Yeah.
Reach out to us if you have any feedback or suggestions on topics you'd like us to cover here. Just email us at hello@fugue.co. And I'll just throw that plug out there. Fugue Developer is our free plan for individual engineers. It takes about 15 minutes to get up and running with Fugue, and you get a full visual map of your cloud environment and your compliance and security posture. So it's really fast to kind of get going with Fugue and see where you need to focus your efforts to getting more secure and compliant in the cloud. So cool. Well, this was awesome, Ricardo. Thanks, Dave, and everybody else for joining us today. And we will see you next Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern time.
Awesome. Take care.
Cheers, Ricardo.